Channel open. Welcome back to WeeklyTrek, a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network and presented in partnership with TrekCore.com. I am your host, Alex Perry.
What's today's date? The date.
Today's show was recorded on June 29th, 2023, and is current through the Star Trek Strange New Worlds episode Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, so beware of spoilers. All right, let's get into the show.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
WeeklyTrek is a regular news show covering the biggest stories from the Star Trek franchise. We are in the Alex Kurtzman era of Star Trek with the 12th television show and the 14th movie currently in production, and merchandise continuing to fill the Bajoran wormhole. So stick with me and I'll help you sort the real facts from lots of the Dominion propaganda that you'll find online. But I can't do this alone, and my guest this week is returning guest Marty Ali. Marty, welcome back to WeeklyTrek.
Hello, Alex. It's nice to be here once again after a long absence.
Oh, yes. I think I was looking. I can't believe the last time I had you on was 2019. It has been much, much too long. Well, yeah. I'm glad I corrected that tonight. Well, Marty, you know the drill. I want to know something that's got you excited about Star Trek at the moment. What's got you moving at Warp 10?
Well, I'm just fresh from watching the Season 2, Episode 3 of Strange New Worlds, which I know we're going to talk about.
All right.
I was, before that, I was cleaning my room listening to the Star Trek Prodigy soundtrack.
Sure.
That I didn't realize had a Volume 5.
Yep.
So I was excited for some new Star Trek music while I clean today. It reminded me a lot of the most recent films that Michael, I'm going to butcher his name if I try and say it. Yes, thank you. His music reminds me a lot of his music.
Yeah, Nami Melamed is a fabulous composer, and there is a lot of Prodigy Season 1 music, and yeah, it's all on Spotify to enjoy. I think it's pretty much like all of the music from every episode. It's really terrific.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great collection.
Yeah, I would like that much music from Strange New Worlds, especially from this episode, because I love the music. Also, Nami Melamed, I love the music for Strange New Worlds. And this week's episode was also great in the music department.
Yes, it was great all the way around, I think.
Yeah.
Personally, but...
All right, so 3 episodes of Season 2 so far, Marty. Broken Circle, Ad Astra, Ad Aspera, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. How do you rank them so far?
Oh, gosh, that's I think I'd have to do 3, 2, 1.
Nice. Yeah, I think that I'm in the same way. I think I'm the same way.
They just keep getting better and better.
Yeah, which is a good place to be.
Absolutely.
All right, let me tell you what I'm feeling good about Star Trek this week, which is that I last had you on the show 4 years ago, and about that time, completely independently, I decided one weekend I was going to become a guy who made Star Trek model kits, or at least I wanted to try and do that. It had never been something I was into as a kid, and all of a sudden I was just like, you know what? I want to make a Star Trek model kit. It's been so long, I don't even remember what the impetus was. But I bought a kit. I bought the Enterprise D round 2, 1 to 2,500 scale. It's about 9-10 inches long, Enterprise D.
Wow.
And I bought all of the paints, and I watched a bunch of YouTube videos about how to do it. This was all 4 years ago. And then I was like, okay, now I know how to do it. I've got all the stuff. And then I just sort of put them in a box and never got around to it. Well, about 3 weeks ago, one day, I was just like, oh, I remember I have all that stuff. I remember I studied the YouTube video about how to make it. I'm finally going to do it. And I did it. I made, yes, I glued everything together. I spray painted the base color. I hand painted the details around the nacelles. And then I did all the decals around the whole ship. And I have put it in my office so that I can look at it all the time because I'm very proud of myself.
Oh, nice.
And now I've become a model kit guy because, of course, once
you start, you really can't stop, can you?
Exactly. Once I decide I like something, I really like something. So I've bought 7 more.
And the collection will just keep growing, yeah.
Yeah, right. And it probably will be another 4 years before I get around to making the next one. But I had a very good time with it.
Oh, don't say that.
I don't have a lot of hobbies that don't involve looking at screens. And so it was nice to do something with my hands for a change. And it was a lot of fun to do. And I'm not terribly good at it, particularly the hand painting.
That's the part that sounds the most stressful, is the hand painting of it all.
Yeah. The bit that I didn't like the most was painting the phaser strips around the edge of the saucer, because it's just this little thin line, and it sort of shows, and it's this much darker gray, so it really shows up if you screw up. So that was the only thing that, like, if you look at it closely, you're like, oh, Alex is not a very good hand painter, at least on his first try. But I don't know, maybe I'll get better as I.
Or you would look at it and just say, oh my gosh, this is hand painted. Wow.
yes, and be very impressed.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was fun. So I'm going to try some more of those. I got some bigger ones. I got a Defiant and an Enterprise B that are in scale with each other. And I'm going to build the Defiant and I'm going to build the Enterprise B. But rather than label it the Enterprise B, I bought some labels to do the Lakota so I can do it as the Paradise Lost battle.
Yeah.
So that's how my crazy brain works. All right. Well, with that, let's turn to the week's top stories.
Good day, Voyager, and welcome to A Briefing with Neelix. It's a catchy title, isn't it?
Well, after announcing last Friday, June 23rd, that Star Trek Prodigy had been cancelled and that the show would be removed from the service within a week, it turns out Paramount Plus couldn't wait to get rid of the show from their service, and it was taken down on Monday, June 26th. Yes, Paramount Plus gave just 3 days for fans to enjoy Star Trek Prodigy, including the last 10 episodes of Season 1 that, in the United States and most everywhere else, there is now no way to watch legally. Outraged by Star Trek fans about the cancellation and removal from Paramount Plus, which was only a few hours old when we recorded our episode last week, has not abated, with fans keeping up a strong push to make sure Paramount Global is aware how disgusted we are with their decision and that the corporation needs to find a solution. Under the hashtag Save Star Trek Prodigy, fans, cast, and creatives from across the Star Trek franchise have rallied to pressure the corporation into making Prodigy available again. The focus of that effort has been on securing a digital release of the back 10 episodes of Season 1, a home media release for the rest of Season 1, and a concerted effort by the streamer to shop the show to another platform so that it can live on. The production team for Star Trek Discovery have obliquely hinted that the fan response to Prodigy's cancellation and deletion from Paramount Plus may be having an impact, with series co-creators Kevin and Dan Hageman tweeting today that, quote, "I don't know about you, but it feels good to fight for these kids who are fighting as hard as they can to get accepted into Starfleet." In addition, series co-executive producer Aaron Waltke, who published some advice for folks who wanted to know how to support Prodigy, it's pretty simple: buy the merchandise, tweet about how much you want it back, tweeted, quote, "Can't say much, but keep it up and keep it positive." I'm not sure I entirely agree that the corporation deserves to hear only positive messages, given fans are very angry, and there should be a, and this is the important part, constructive and respectful outlet for that. But keep it up, we will, until all Star Trek is available to watch once again. And there are tangible signs that demand for Prodigy is up. Most online retailers at least temporarily sold out of the Blu-ray of Prodigy's Season 1's first 10 episodes, now that home media is the only place you can watch them, and a Change.org petition has netted 25,000 signatures in just under a week, almost as many as the petition that contributed to the creation of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Marty, what was your reaction to the cancellation of Star Trek Prodigy?
Confusion, mostly. I just don't understand why the streamers are doing this. Like, why they're getting tax credits for underperforming shows, like the whole business behind it. I just don't understand any of it. I do have faith that the show will find, at least the full first season, will find a DVD release. So I'm sure we'll be able to watch at least the first season. But the second season, I don't know if Paramount would pay to keep finishing the show if they weren't planning on releasing it at some point, at least on home media. So, I mean, I'm just shocked that HBO did it first. I think with some of those those niche DC cartoons they had on there. And then it just kind of rolled from there. So I don't know what's going on. But
yeah, it definitely. So a week later, right, like I recorded last week's episode in the heat of my fury about this. And, my anger has not like fully subsided related to it. But I think now, a week later, how am I feeling? Still really angry, particularly angry about the fact that, they said it would be gone within a week.
Yeah.
They announced it on a Friday, and the very next business day, which was Monday, it was gone by like the middle of the day, which was first thing in the morning, West Coast time.
Yeah.
Which, that's pretty galling. The fact that aside from the comments that they made on Friday, we really haven't heard from anybody connected to Paramount about this, except for those folks who are connected to the show and want to like acknowledge fan support and continue to rally that fan support for stuff. But I think at this point in time, like I am very confident, I think, that yes, we will get the last 10 episodes of season 1 on Blu-ray, and that we will get season 2's 20 episodes on Blu-ray as well. As you say, they would not be paying to finish it if they did not have plans to release it in some fashion. Very different from Batgirl, the like DC project that sort of kicked off this thing, that where, you know, they just sort of downed tools and said, we're done and we're not finishing this, we're not putting it out. That's it. It's not happening. And so, like, I'm feeling optimistic about home media release. I still sort of had this question in my mind of, like, who is the streamer who's ultimately going to pick it up and move forward with it? But hey, that's not for us to figure out. That's for Paramount to figure out. And even if no streamer ultimately does, I think we still get definitely the home media release. It will just probably then be Star Trek's first like direct to DVD season.
Right. It'll be like a Disney sequel, you know?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. It'll be Aladdin 2, The Book of Jafar, but it'll be but it'll be,
oh boy.
Yeah.
Maybe Aladdin 3. Let's make it Aladdin 3.
Yes, that one was much better. So yeah, like, you know, it just all around sucks a lot.
Yep, it really does. Because it could happen to any of these shows now. Like they could just decide we don't want Star Trek at all and rip it all off the service.
Right.
You know, like what?
Yeah, it certainly does very much feel like, given how hard the marketing push leaned into Paramount Plus being the home of all Star Trek, that meant that they were doing a bit of a deal with us. And the deal was we would subscribe to Paramount Plus, and as a result, we would get access to all of Star Trek. But they've broken that deal now because
several times.
Yeah, because there's
of licensing deals or whatever. Like
right. The movie's going on and off, and now, like at least we were like, well, all of the TV shows are there. Well, they're not. And from this point forward,
it's like, how long are they planning to keep Star Trek Picard on the service now that it's ended? You know, like, what are they going to do with that now? So it's just kind of, there's so many what ifs.
Right. So many what ifs and so many just like, I don't know, like things that they need to do in order to like reestablish a bit of the trust that I don't feel for or with them anymore. And a week into this, you know, they've not really done that. I was thinking back to when the last time Paramount colossally screwed up, which was over the launch of Discovery Season 4 internationally, when the Netflix deal fell apart and they were initially like, oh, well, we'll just sort of like, you know, put it out at a later time. And there was a real fan uproar. And then they sort of figured out the like jerry-rig solution of Pluto TV and digital release, et cetera, so that international fans could watch it concurrent with the US. And that took about a week in between the announcement that the Netflix deal had fallen apart and them coming up with their solution. It's been a week. I would say the fan reaction has been equally as negative to the corporation. So the part that feels to me like it would have been an easy like thing they could have done to sort of signal that they were listening to the fans and they were listening to fans' requests would have been, we know they've been working on the last 10 episodes of season 1 to put out on Blu-ray because a few of the production team members prior to the cancellation of Prodigy have talked about how, you know, they've recorded like commentaries and stuff for them. Why couldn't they have at least announced that that was coming this week as a way of sort of saying, yes, we know we have deleted 10 episodes of Star Trek from streaming and that they're not available anymore. Well, here's the home media release that you will be able to get them from, right? Like that felt like a gimme to me, but a week later, we've not had it, which also sucks. So, you know, hopefully next week we'll get more information about that. I think it'll be more time before we learn about season 2, but at the very least, getting those 10 episodes of season 1 that we can't currently watch to at least have a timeline for when we can watch them would be step 1.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the reason they don't announce those things concurrently is because smart people are not in charge.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that is for sure. Well, turning to Star Trek Strange New Worlds, this week's episode, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, featured another alternate version of James T. Kirk, played again by Paul Wesley in a time travel adventure with Laan Noonien Singh to modern-day Toronto. Speaking to Ryan Britt at Esquire, Wesley talked more about his interpretation of the iconic role. If you actually watch the original series, yes, there's some exaggerated stuff there, but for the most part, Kirk is pretty down to earth, Wesley explains. He's not like the caricature people think of, or as big as people have made him out to be in their heads over the years. Wesley went on to explain why he feels a real connection to the Kirk character. I think he's very close to me, Wesley explained. If you were to give me Kirk without any preconceived notion of Kirk, and there was no William Shatner and there was no Chris Pine, I would feel like this role is made for me. But because of the stigma and the zeitgeist of Captain Kirk every day, I'm like, wait, am I doing this correctly? Should I be doing it this way? I normally wouldn't question that, but because it's such an iconic role, I can't help but think about my choices because I'm doing something so different from the norm. And Wesley talks about how his interpretation of Kirk is drawn from one particular line of dialogue from the original series. I totally took that stack of book with legs line and I actually based my Kirk on that line. I didn't want him to be a complete stack of books with legs because that would have been watching paint dry, but I wanted to incorporate that brainier aspect of Kirk into my version of the character. When we think of Captain Kirk, there's an immediate sort of reaction. We know who he is. Kirk has obviously been established very clearly by not only pop culture history, but also obviously what William Shatner did in the 1960s. But the key thing is he's recognizable. There's a very recognizable feeling, and I wanted to do something a little different with that. I thought this was a really good opportunity to start from a different place and watch Kirk build into the character that he's known for in pop culture history. And what would Wesley Kirk's music of choice be, given Pine Kirk's music was the Beastie Boys? It would be way too meta to say my Kirk listens to William Shatner, Wesley retorts. Marty, how have you been enjoying Paul Wesley's performance as James T. Kirk in Star Trek Strange New Worlds?
I have been loving it so far. I'm excited to see him as Prime Universe Kirk eventually, besides the snippet we got at the end of this week's episode, but because so far it's just been two alternate Kirks, and they've been very different. So I'm excited to see what he does with our Prime Timeline Kirk.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is a cool way of clearly they want to do the Kirk thing. And we do know he shows up later in the season, and this time actually is, Prime Timeline Kirk. So there is a proper Kirk performance coming. But I do sort of like the idea that for as much Kirk as we have gotten, right, we know there are 3 Kirk episodes, 2 we've seen and 1 we haven't yet seen, maybe more, but we just know there's at least 1 more, that actually the sort of Kirk interaction with the Enterprise crew as Prime Timeline Kirk is pretty limited to basically the little snippet that we saw in this episode and then whatever happens in that future episode.
Right.
That at least the 2 we've seen today have been, alternate timeline James T. Kirks. And they have been a little different. This one felt more like more
lighthearted.
Yeah.
A little looser.
Right. And in some ways more like TOS Kirk, right? Than the Equality of Mercy Kirk, who was pretty dour. And I can't remember if it was in this interview or if it was in another interview, I saw Wesley say, he specifically played the Equality of Mercy Kirk as being more of a stoic Captain Kirk than the one that we knew from the show.
Right.
And what about the episode as a whole? What did you you mentioned up front you liked it, but tell me more. What do you think? Oh my gosh.
Okay, so I wasn't expecting it to be this little rom-com. And at first I was resisting it. Just no, that's so cheesy. She can't. But then I started thinking about it. And it's this is a woman who's not had any real connections, pretty much her entire life.
Yeah.
And here she is just thrust into this situation where she basically has to make this connection with this alt universe Kirk, only to watch him die. Spoiler alert, but we said that earlier.
Yep.
To protect her ancestor who is a mass murderer. Just so many layers to it. And then Christina Chung's performance, and at the end when she just is weeping after she calls our Kirk. Oh, so good. Got me right in the feels.
I loved this episode. I thought it was so good.
So good, yes.
Just everything that I wanted it to be in so many ways. There are a few things I really like about this episode. One, I love it. I love it. There are lots of sort of Star Trek tropey type episodes I'm not a big fan of, but the time travel to modern day is one that
I can never get enough of them.
Can't get enough of that, right? Future's End, Carpenter Street, now Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. delightful. I really liked the sort of like that they just leaned into like temporal agents and Department of Temporal Investigations. And, you know, they didn't say temporal Cold War or temporal wars, but like the temporal agent at the start of the episode who sort of pulls up that like visual interface. It's the same sort of L cars, or I guess they called it T cars.
I can't wait to see cropped, zoomed in shots of those on Twitter later too.
Yeah, so like that was really cool. I thought the Wesley Laan stuff was really well done. I thought the romance was pretty well done. I loved, and we'll have more to say on this later, the line about the eugenics wars moving in the timeline from the 1990s to the 2020s.
Oh, yes. I was like, oh, a little retcon. What's that about?
I
More
just
of that,
thought
please.
that was such a smart way of like acknowledging the messiness of Star Trek history and sort of applying a bit of an explanation to it that I, you know, sort of really appreciated, because they, you know, didn't have to do that, didn't have to do anything like that. And they did in a way that made sense. And I actually think has, you know, potentially grander implications for the franchise as a whole. But again, I'll hold that for the end of the episode. But like, you know, the sort of Romulan element to it, the Toronto-iness of it all, right? Like this Star Trek has been a Canadian production now for 6 years, different kinds of Star Treks, but this was really the first time that like they embraced that Canadianness of it, and I really appreciated that and thought that that was really terrific.
I especially loved Kirk's little joke when they arrived, like, New York. No, it's just Toronto. Look at the sign, you idiot. Like,
yeah, it's just really, really good. Really, really well done. So yeah, I was happy and thrilled with the way that it all came together. And this is my favorite episode of the season so far. Probably in my top 3 of the 13 episodes of Strange New Worlds that we've watched so far. And I will say that like the Kirk performance has massively grown on me. I really like the chemistry with Christina Chong's Laan, and I thought that Christina Chong's performance in this episode was just really, really terrific. She had the chance to show a much wider emotional range for the character than she has in other episodes, and like it was just so great
and heartbreaking.
And really sold that heartbreak to it.
Really did.
Well, sticking with Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and in an interview with Trek Movie, the showrunners Henry Alonso Myers and Akiva Goldsman talked a little about the second season's first few episodes. Speaking about Spock's arc for the season, the showrunners confirmed that his relationship with emotion is going to be a through line for multiple episodes this year. It is a big thing that he goes through because it's emotional and real, Alonso Myers said, and it's something that the character will be thinking about from episode to episode. It doesn't disappear, and that's sort of the way they all work. Akiva Goldsman also talked about the show's decision to expand upon the Gorn, oftentimes in ways that don't really mesh well with the dialogue from the episode that introduced them, that being the original Star Trek's Arena. Because for me, storytelling beats canon, Goldsman said. And that may not be popular, but it's the truth. So when they can go hand in hand, great. But when I was writing the pilot, I was looking for something that was just monstrous, that was Cthulhu-like, something that was unthinking. Our shows are empathy generators, and I wanted to have an element which was in relief of that. I wanted something that you couldn't identify with, something that was utterly alien, something that was all appetite and instinct in ways that we couldn't quite understand. And I also wanted to signal place and time in a way that personally I found interesting. So you should definitely blame me for this one. And as for when season 3 might go before the cameras after its filming schedule was scrapped due to the WGA writer strike, we had a date and we had to abort it because we are striking and we stand in solidarity with our writing brethren, said Akiva. So when the strike is over, then we will set a new date. Marty, we talked about your preference for the first 3 episodes. Talk a bit more about like how you enjoying Strange New Worlds so far this season.
It's been good. I actually, talking about Spock's arc, I really like his arc now that like he let his emotions out of Pandora's box, so to speak, and now he has to deal with that. So it's just something that I personally can relate to. So didn't expect to vibe with Spock this season, but here we are vibing with Spock. So I think the core room episode was fantastic. The guest star in that episode was great, as was the most recent episode. I thought the guest star was really good. So they just knock it out of the park. Like really only maybe like one or two episodes that I would not watch regularly, but that's about it.
And how are you feeling about the Gordon stuff? And I mean, particularly the way that Akiva was talking about it in this interview.
I kind of agree with Akiva here. I don't really think that a canon should be tied to just like one remark and one sentence in one show from 60 years ago, you know? So I think there's new and exciting ways to tell stories now. And if they want to take the risk to do it, I say go for it. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that's like bumping me a little bit is I kind of feel like the way that he is talking about the Gorn in terms of like what he wants for their role in the show doesn't feel terribly deep or thoughtful to me, right? Like the way that they were presented in Arena was sort of specifically that, yes, they looked very different and very scary and very ugly and like were not at all similar to people, but that deep down, right underneath the sort of dinosaur lizard exterior, they had more in common than we thought. Now this sort of reinterpretation of the Gorn and Akiva Goldsman, the way he's talked about it, right? Like he's sort of stripped all of that away. The point now is that they are very much just like complete instinct, complete animalistic, sort of like, nothing deeper about their motivation than just they want to kill you and that's what they're going to do. And I personally, I know most people put Memento Mori and All Those Who Wander near the top of their list of episodes for season 1. I just always kind of bumped up against this Gorn thing. And so for me, like All Those Who Wander definitely suffers for me because of the death of Hema, and Memento Mori is a great episode, but like, I don't know, there's just something about it that's never quite clicked with me. And I think part of what's not clicking with me is this whole like Gorn philosophy that I just don't find super interesting. And so you can hang the most excellent episode of Star Trek around that, and I'm still just going to be like, I don't know how I feel about this. But Marty, I mean, what do you think about that?
I mean, I see your point of view. You don't want them to turn the Gorn into this just malicious race because that's not what they were intended to be originally. But I'm hoping that's not true because all we've seen so far have been like young Gorn.
Yeah.
And then we didn't really see the Gorn in that submarine episode.
Yep.
So I'm hoping that they're a little more intelligent. They've got a little more going on than just vicious, instinctual need for feeding, like some monsters can go.
Yeah.
So I see your concern. Yes.
Yeah, just, and I think we're almost certainly, based off of the season premiere, going to see more of them at some point later this season.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll see them a couple times. But
yeah, I just like, I would like more, as much as Akiva has talked about, like, that's not the point of this. I would like more depth, and I would like more motivation that just goes beyond, sort of like, they are pure evil and need to be countered. Because, like, I know that Akiva...
I never liked the episode. I'm bad with episode titles, I apologize. The second Gorn episode of the first season.
All Those Who Wander.
And they just decided, well, we're not going to try to talk to them or save them. We're just going to kill them straight out of the gate. Like, that's always been like, well, that's not really something I don't think Starfleet would do, but okay.
Yeah, so it's just like, I don't know. This is the only thing about Strange New Worlds that I'm struggling with a little bit. But because it's not like, right, like, that's also the beauty of Strange New Worlds, which is, yes, this Gorn thing, kind of ran through season 1, it's running through season 2, but it's not like in season 1, 2 episodes were about that. It's not like all 13 episodes were about that, and I had a problem with it, and therefore I didn't like the whole season because I had a problem with sort of the underlining narrative that crossed all of those episodes. It's like, no, it was 10 episodes of Strange New Worlds season 1, and 2 of those had a Gorn focus, and 8 of them didn't. And so even if the Gorn stuff wasn't necessarily working for me so well, there were 8 other episodes that had very little and nothing to do with them. And now in season 2, with 3 episodes in, and only one of them has had a little bit to do with the Gorn, and 2 of them have had absolutely nothing to do with it. So that is sort of the nice thing about this show, is if there are some of those thematic things that aren't working great, it's not like you're then like, well, okay, well, the whole season's not going to work for me because there's this one thing I don't particularly care for.
Right. It's just 1 or 2 episodes out of the season instead of, an entire season that drags on and on.
Well, and lastly this week, Paramount have announced the release of Star Trek Picard Season 3 on Blu-ray, and there are a few different ways you can get it. In addition to the standard Blu-ray release of Season 3, which includes special features and commentaries on multiple episodes, the season will also be released as a steelbook and as part of a complete series Picard release packaged with Seasons 1 and 2. The third season set releases on September 5th in the US and Canada, and in mid-November in much of the rest of the world. And if that wasn't enough, Paramount also announced the release of the Picard Legacy Collection, a bumper box set that includes the full series of Picard, the full series of Star Trek The Next Generation, and the 4 TNG movies, making it a complete Star Trek The Next Generation experience. In addition to all of the series, the Legacy Collection includes 4 fansets badges from TNG and Picard, a set of playing cards, and Chateau Picard coasters. That set will arrive on October 17th in the US and Canada, and in mid-November in the UK, Germany, and Italy. Marty, did you enjoy Picard Season 3, and will you be picking up any of the home media releases?
I did enjoy Picard Season 3, even though I thought it had some story problems, but overall it was a good ride, a fun ride. I think I'll pick up I've been waiting to see if they were going to do any series box sets at the end of their runs of these shows. And now I have my question answered. They are going to do them. So I'm going to pick up the complete series box set, I believe.
Yes, there's definitely much more of a motivation to pick up the Blu-rays than there was before.
Definitely now. Yes, for sure.
3 weeks ago, the reason to get the Blu-rays was because, you know, like it's a slightly better picture quality when you watch them on a Blu-ray rather than on streaming, and you get the special features, which you don't get if you watch them streaming. And now it's, well, because tomorrow they might decide to delete this Star Trek show entirely, and you want some way to...
Exactly. Who knows? Who knows what they're going to decide? So
yeah. I guess there's been some push also. Bill Hunt at the Digital Bits has sort of been talking about, like, there's a lot of desire for a 4K release of Picard Season 3, just like there was with Strange New Worlds Season 1. I guess the studio, like, hasn't been sure about that because they didn't release Season 1 and 2 on 4K, and they're worried that people won't want that. So they've been trying to sort of make a bit of a fuss about, like, yes, people do want Picard Season 3 on 4K, so we'll see if that ultimately ends up happening. I really like this Legacy Collection. I'm going to get it, even though I've got those movies and that TV show and a lot of the stuff. I just think it's a really fun way of presenting
it's a nice
everything.
Little box. Yeah,
it's a great little box. So yeah, I'm excited for that. That's the way I'm gonna get Picard Season 3, is by getting the Legacy Collection and having everything together. And yeah, so if Paramount Plus ultimately decides to delete it from the service, I will still have access.
Yep, I'm gonna start picking them up as well, but I think I'll pick them up as series collection instead of individual seasons, because it just feels better that way to have it all nice and tucked in one little box.
Well, and the series themselves are starting to end, so you get the Picard full season series this year,
and then I'll have
Discovery full series next year. Yeah.
Oh, so sad.
Probably Prodigy the year after that. Maybe Lower Decks the year after that. So
stop making me cry.
Yes, it's an interesting time to be a Star Trek fan.
Yes, I've noticed all the little taglines in the show have changed a little bit.
Yeah, yes, they have, and that's how they'll stay for a while. All right, well, we've talked about the facts, and now let's speculate on what's going to happen in the future of Star Trek.
You make some very good points, Captain. But it's still all speculation and theory.
So each week, my guest and I give you a theory or wish we're nurturing about any of the shows or the future of the franchise. So Marty, let's hear your theory or wish for this week.
Oh, I don't have any theories because I have no idea. My wish, though, because all evidence has pointed, well, not all evidence, but, some evidence has pointed towards the musical episode at the end of this season.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is my wish, is that we're going to get just a fun, carefree, Broadway-style musical episode of Star Trek this year.
You have to think the odds-on favorite is now that episode 9 is a musical episode, and there's a few reasons for that. One is the cast and crew talking about how episode 9 is definitely sort of the most off-the-wall.
It was like the most off and the most work and all this stuff. Yeah.
That they had to like come in and do rehearsals on the weekend in order to get it right.
Right.
And then before season 2 was released, a list of episode names leaked for the 10 episodes of season 2, which included The Broken Circle, Ad Astra Ad Aspera, and Tomorrow is Tomorrow is Tomorrow. Also says the Lower Decks crossover's name is Those Old Scientists, which I think is a perfect name for that episode. But the name of episode 9 on that list was Subspace Rhapsody. And if that's not the name of a Star Trek musical episode, I don't know what absurd thing I will do because I'll be wrong, but I will do it because of course, with all of the information we have, yeah, I think Star Trek's finally doing its musical episode.
Yeah, and I'm excited, and I can't wait. I'm so excited. And then maybe they'll bring it to the stage, and we can see it on stage. Wouldn't that be great?
Well, I also wonder, too, will they do, when they do the soundtrack release for season 2, will they include the songs like a Broadway cast recording style?
Oh, they better. Or release it as its own album.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Well, we'll have to see if the music's any good first. If people want to, people do want to sing along to it.
We should see the thing first.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing. It's Star Trek does a lot of things well, but this will be its first musical. So, it might not be very good, but we'll wait and see. And it's strange.
I feel like maybe they're priming us because I've noticed a lot of more popular music sneaking into Strange New Worlds.
Right.
Like this week's choice of song was very interesting.
Yeah. All right, let me give you my theory. And this one, I'm still just I'm just sort of noodling on this one. So it's not fully fleshed out in my head.
Okay.
But I've not been able to get this thought out of my mind since I watched Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And it specifically refers back to that eugenics wars line, right?
Yes.
The covert Romulan agent basically says, I've been here, she's there to kill Khan, because if she kills Khan, then the eugenics wars never happen. And as a result, the Federation's never created. They don't, become enemies of the Romulan Empire, and the Romulan Empire conquers the galaxy, basically. Or at least conquers the area that the Federation currently occupies. And she says something about how she's been hanging around on Earth for 20 years because this was supposed to have happened in the 1990s, but because of changes to the timeline, it's not happening until now. And I've seen, as obviously did people Robert Meyer Burnett, who talk about how, that's absolutely an absolute canon violation, that, this is Strange New Worlds stomping all over the original series. And a few thoughts to that. One, the original series was already stomped over Future's End. Remember that? That was set in the mid-90s. Was half the world under the control of Khan Noonien singing Future's End? Of course not. If it was, it would have come up in some way, shape, or form. The 1996 that the Voyager crew go to is the same 1996 that we lived through. And there's just sort of this sense that the eugenics wars is in the future, which from 1967, it very much was 30 years in the future. Now, the 1990s is 30 years behind us. So I thought that was just a really neat way of kind of tidying up the timeline a little bit. They established in the series pilot for Strange New Worlds that the eugenics wars is a precursor to World War III, that it's not clear if they're two separate conflicts that happen very close together, or if they're one conflict that starts off with one name and ends up having another name. They've not kind of explored that piece of it yet, but they have sort of put their flag in the soil of the eugenics wars now takes place in the late 2020s, so in our future, even after Picard season 2,
which I felt bled into this episode as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I had a theory ages ago that I thought Brent Spiner was going to make a cameo.
I kept waiting for him to pop around the corner.
Me too. Yeah.
I was okay with it though.
Oh, I was totally okay with it. Oh, this episode rules. This episode is extremely my
so
SHAT. So yeah. But okay, so there are changes to the Star Trek timeline that sort of acknowledge the fact that that line from the original series was true until all of a sudden it wasn't. And the sort of implication being that the temporal wars, the temporal Cold War, whatever you want to call it, it's had a couple of different names in Star Trek now so far, has had an impact on the Star Trek timeline as a whole. And so kind of hesitate to say some of this out loud because it does sort of get a little bit into some of the ways that people who have just decided to hate these shows for the sake of hating them have talked about this. But Strange New Worlds has sort of laid it on the table that Strange New Worlds is not an alternate timeline, but it is maybe not the pristine original timeline that we experienced in the original series. And that has a number of implications for me. The one I'm going to drill into, because it's the one I've thought about the most, is, and because listeners know a couple of months ago, I finished a full franchise rewatch. I actually think this sort of plays into like how you watch the Star Trek franchise as a whole and the choices that you make. Prior to Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, there were really two ways you could watch the Star Trek. I mean, there are lots of ways you can watch the Star Trek franchise, but there were two that I would choose between: production order and chronological order. Production order being starting with a show that began in 1966 and ending in a show that was running in 2023, right? Like I'm watching it original series, animated series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, Discovery, etc. That's one way you could do it, where you are experiencing it as the passage of the production timeline. The other way you could experience it is the passage of the chronological timeline of the series, right? You begin with Enterprise. It's the earliest chronological series. Then you have Discovery, Strange New Worlds, TOS, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Lower Decks, Prodigy, Picard, and then you do the last two, will be the last 3 seasons of Discovery, and then Starfleet Academy all the way at the end. And it's like you've had a production timeline and you've had a chronological timeline. But actually, based off of the sort of in-universe explanation for the shifting of the eugenics wars, I think there's a very strong argument to be made that a production timeline watch is also a chronological timeline watch of the Star Trek franchise. And that if you experience it watching it TOS, animated series, TNG, etc. onwards, you are also experiencing it in the way that the timeline for the Star Trek universe shifts as a result of time travel. Beginning with, right, there's always been this thing about, this goes all the way back to Enterprise's premiere. Is Enterprise an alternate timeline that was created by the Enterprise E going back to 63 in Star Trek First Contact and changing the way that First Contact itself happened, which potentially created the existence of the temporal Cold War, which resulted in a slight rewriting of the timeline of the original series, which results in the eugenics wars shifting from the 1990s to the 2020s. So if you watch TOS and the eugenics wars happens in 1996, you watch TNG, you watch Deep Space Nine, you watch Voyager, you're watching First Contact, and you are seeing the setup for a set of changes in the timeline that result in you watching Enterprise and that result in you watching Strange New Worlds a bit later. What does that mean further down the line, right? Like, you know, that sort of perennial question of what is TOS in the space that Strange New Worlds now occupies? Is it the TOS that we saw in 1966? Is it a different version of TOS? I think it's an open question. Like, I'm not saying this is a whole, like, you know, not my canon, not prime timeline, etc., etc. I just think from like just a completely open-minded, I love the Star Trek canon. I love all of it. I love thinking about ways that it fits together. I just think this creates a ton of interesting implications for what the Star Trek universe is, what you're watching at any given time, and how it all fits together. And I think this basically makes the case that, like, actually, if you watch everything in production order, you're also watching an in-universe story way of seeing it, in addition to just watching it the way it was put together. I don't know, Marty, what do you think about that?
I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. And I think it actually makes sense in my brain, especially if you think about the way that time travel works, because First Contact and that Voyager episode take place roughly around the same time.
Yep.
And then there was no eugenics war in that Voyager episode. So, I mean, it has a lot of merit. Alex has a lot of merit. And I love just thinking about, like, we're watching the ripples as they happen, you know? And
yeah, in my head, I meant to look before this episode, but I didn't. It was like, in the timeline, does Future's End take place after the Enterprise comes back from the events of First Contact? Because if it does,
I know there's a First Contact reference, like, somewhere around there.
Yeah,
in
right.
Voyager. I just
they're
don't
the
remember.
same year. First Contact premiered in 96, and Future's End was like either late 96 or early 97 or something like that. So, like, they happen around the same time in production, which means they also happen around the same time in the timeline, because, you know, everything sort of hangs together there. So, like, I sort of need to sit down and, like, plot it all out.
It makes it interesting to think about that Paul Wesley interview, too, because they're talking about the possibility of it, you know, him taking over the Enterprise and basically being at and beyond where the original series was, which has always been, like, an interesting thing, like, and then what happens? And it's just like, well, we know what happened, so why would you say that? You know, like, it's always been interesting to me.
Well, and it's a little, there's a little bit of contradictoriness to it, because you see both versions of the Constitution class in Picard. You see the Strange You Worlds version at the beginning of season 1, and then you see the TOS version in season 3. But like, you know, you can extend some of that out of, well, Picard sees the Strange New Worlds version in season 1 because there has been timeline changes. And what you didn't realize in TNG after the events of First Contact is that you're seeing a version that now has that version of the TOS constitution and not the TOS. Anyway, it's like, I think smarter people than I am will need to think more deeply about this. But I think it's cool. I think it just gives us a new way of accessing this franchise. I think it gives us a new way of basically saying the more episodes there are and the longer this goes on and the more creative teams, the more you probably are going to see inconsistencies and ways that things don't fit together. It's going to get a little Doctor
Who after a while. Yeah,
and like that's okay, right? Like, and it should be okay.
Certainly is okay on Doctor Who, so it should be okay on Star Trek as well, right?
Right, because it's just all about having a fun story. And if he wants to revisit Pompeii 3 times, he's welcome to. Do you have a theory or a wish for Discovery, Section 31, Starfleet Academy, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, or Prodigy that you'd like to share? Tweet them to me at WeeklyTrek or email them to me at weeklytrek@thetricordertransmissions.com, and I might feature your theory in a future episode. Well, that's all the time we've got for this episode of Weekly Trek. Thank you so much to my guest, Marty Ali, for joining me today. Marty, how can people contact you if they want to continue the conversation?
I tweet about Star Trek on Twitter at Time Travel Marty. It's pretty much all I tweet about nowadays. I don't even tweet. I just kind of creep, but you know, I'm there. I'm around.
Hey, Star Trek's the only thing worth tweeting about these days.
Yeah, for real.
And you can find this show on Twitter at WeeklyTrek and me at Alexander T. Perry. And if you enjoy the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast player of choice. And please check out some of the other great shows on the Tricorder Transmissions. And if you like our shows, please also consider becoming a Patreon of Tricorder, which you can find at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And lastly, if you're looking for Star Trek news on the internet, I hope you will turn to trekcore.com. Well, thank you, Marty. Thank you to all of my listeners. And until next week, live long and prosper.